And some of the drivers were very skillful at the time, and they knew how to manipulate them, you know. But the amazing thing about them was there was no speedometers on them. And the drivers, I always felt that during the steam days, the trains actually went faster than the diesels when they came in, some of the trains. And the drivers had great experience, and they were able to judge the speeds just through experience.
Right. Eamon, I suppose you had to be very careful looking out. That's what I would look. You had to look outside ahead. How did you manage, like, you know? Like, okay, we'll take it night. Take a real black night. Yeah. How could you look out from the side of your engine to see what was coming? Take that one. How did you do that?
There was always great clearance between the side of the engine, and we'll say, and the bushes or whatever, or even passing stations or under bridges. There was always at least 3 or 4 feet clearance. The only danger was when changing the staff at night. You know, the staff was what they call the ETS, the electric train staff. It was a kind of a safety device that there could be only one out at any one time for a section, and so you couldn't have 2 trains in the one section at the one time. So these staffs were changed at speed. Was what they called a hand staff or mechanical exchange. So the fireman would throw out the staff, but had a big ring on it, and he'd collect another one, and he'd reach out about 2 to 3 feet to collect it from the signalman. This was an art in itself.
Very good. Tyke, water. Every time you put into a station, you had to fill up with water. What was that all about?
Well, the working of the locomotive was that it was worked by water, steam, naturally enough, and the tank held so much. Well, different types of engines, different sizes of tanks, and then I won't say every station, but we say every major station there was what they called water column and water tanks, and the driver knew exactly how much water he was using to each section or each trip. And he was able to say, we're stopping here for water. Yeah. We stopped, filled up, pulled in your column, filled up, and away again. But it wasn't in every station. No. Sometimes things would go wrong, and you'd have to make a run to try and get to one. Your water would be gone down. And naturally, the driver was going to blame the fireman, and he got the works on all sides.
Of course. Because many a fella got an old shower as well as just standing on the station with those youngsters come over and back. Yeah, Mickey, a question to you now, Michael O'Connell. What was the relation between the engine or the engine driver and the guard's van?
Oh no, you'd want some of the guards here to talk about that, I'll tell you. Well, generally speaking it was good, but there were times when it was a bit, you know, iffy-bitty. Many a time I often saw the driver saying, that so-and-so of a guard, look, he put down a minute in that section, what the hell is he on about, you know, this sort of a way. And there'd be a few words exchanged, and some guards were great. You know, like you'd lose a minute or two, but they wouldn't worry because you'd pull it up the next one, and the tickets were boxed up and everything was working all right. But there had to be an understanding between the driver and the guard for the working of the train as far as braking was concerned, because the old goods trains and the fare specials, they were all loose coupled wagons. And if you were having to stop suddenly, emergency staff, you were dependent on the guard. But of course, when you put the brake on the engine, the wagons all telescoped up on top, so they were touching one another. Now, if the guard slapped on his brake, they stretched suddenly and you could snap your train. So there had to be, you know, they had to work between them, and it had to be sort of smack on, and you had to have a good guard to do that, as well as a good driver. And it generally worked out. It generally worked out.
Jimmy, here's one for you. When you took your engine out and when you headed somewhere, irrespective of it was Claremorris or wherever you were going, when you left the station, who was in charge of that train?
The driver. The guard was in charge of the train, actually, the wagons and all that, but the driver, of course, was in charge of the engine. And he couldn't go unless he had the signals and the staff, and then they got the right of way from the guard or the man in charge of the station. And after moving off, he exchanged signals with him that he was complete, that the van was following, you know.
What about the excursions, the famous excursions on Dublin, or to Galway? Did that mean extra time for you fellas' money? Like, how was that reconciled?
Well, usually the train might start do you see the train might run from Ballina? Well, they sent down an Athlone driver and fireman to Ballina, and he walked it straight to Dublin.
Yeah.
So that one man did it.
Yeah.
And the Dublin man maybe had come back, or if the train was late coming back in the evening, that driver and fireman went up in the morning, came back in the evening again with it.
Ty Curley was saying, yeah, go ahead.
In relation to that, there were what they call special men for those jobs. The men like, we say, Jimmy Healy being a senior man, he was on a regular roster and he would run regular trains, work regular trains. But they had a special men that went off and done these excursions. Could be on a different job every day.
Well, would he get extra money? What was the idea?
No, not for an excursion, because that'd be a fast run. It'd be within the hours your daily work.
Well, was Sunday part of the working week?
Oh, no.
No. You got extra money for
what I mean,
it.
yeah.
So it was great to get a Sunday that time. It added to your bill. Yeah.
And I suppose there wasn't as much tax, no? Nobody bothered about tax that time, I think. Yes, Johnny?
But Joe, another important thing that they were very much insisted upon, that when you go work on the train, when you're away from home, you had to get 9 hours rest.
Oh, that was compulsory.
Compulsory, and a minimum of 12 hours rest at home. And the only allowance that they'd make as regards rest periods was, Eamon could confirm this, that when you be working a race special, that'd be a special with race horses, that'd be going to a race.
Yeah.
The rest period was shorter for that. 7 hours was the minimum rest period.
Well, here's one for Eamon Lacken. Eamon, what kind of care, or were you told before you went out if you were carrying anything special and to be very, very careful of?
Well, I don't know how we answer that one, because you had different type of train. The most important train you were working was a passenger train, and then you had goods trains, and you had special trains, and you had goods trains, and you had specials of stock mostly. So no, there was no dangerous chemical. Only in the last 20 years we got the carriage of the chemical to the Asahi factory in Killala, and then there were special instructions laid down for the working of this train, and to date there has been no major accident.
Well done. Tig, off air they were all telling us about if you were hungry and you wanted your meal on the engine. Tell us about frying the eggs and the sausages.
Well, there'd be times on some trips when you'd have a delay at stations, meeting other trains or whatever was working on the line, and the hunger would be on you. Of course, the driver would say, "I think we'll have a fry." So the old shovel was cleaned. That's the shovel you'd use for firing the engine. Cleaned, and it was the best of steel. And a little bit of whatever, butter, grease, and washed.
Would you put oil or something?
No, you're washing down with the hose.
All right, yeah.
You washed it and cleaned it, and it was as good as anything. So you fried up,
Okay.
and you didn't have to put it directly onto the fire, because the heat from the firebox away from it would even cook.
That's great.
Anything you wanted to fry was, and then your billy cam was there for making your tea. It was no problem.
Well done. Well, that's our cue, actually. Jimmy Healy shouted there, we're having tea and biscuits, lads. There's no rashers or sausages. We'll see you for part 3. Thank you. So you're very, very welcome back once again. I'm with Michael O'Connell, Jimmy Healy, Ty Curley, Eamon Lacken and Johnny Burke, and we're talking about old times on the railway. Jimmy, off air we were talking about discipline. What was it like then way back in the 40s and 50s?
It's very severe all its life on the railway. You had a rule book, you see, and through the rule book, if you violated any rule, there was over 240 rules in the book, and with about 20 clauses to each of them. And if you violated any of them, they'd catch on something else. If you were late for work, you held up a train, you might get a day's suspension. If you broke gates, you got maybe a week, and you were up for a medical test and all, an eyesight test.
Yeah. Way back, everybody remembers, even yourselves when you're young, you always saw the old railwaymen, and they always prided themselves with their watch. Were they very, very sort of scrupulous about having their train on time?
Oh yes, but they weren't supplied to watches by the company. CIE never supplied anything.
Only when they were leaving after 50 years.
Well, I didn't get one, and I had 50-year service.
But I mean, it's one of those conditions, not conditions, but it's sort of pride for a driver to have his train on time, wasn't it?
Oh yes. They took pride in and to see who would use the least amount of coal possible. You know, that was
Eamon, fog conditions, what was it like?
Very difficult for a train crew working under fog conditions, because depending on what view your view, depending on the density of the fog, you might have 20 or 30 yards, maybe 100 yards. And then sound came into it. Most of the drivers with their experience in the steam days, they could know what kind of terrain they were travelling over. And an overhead bridge would convey to them where they were. And the signalmen could bring on what they called fogmen. And the fogmen would have what they call detonators, and they would put them and place them just at the bottom of the signal pole. So a driver, when he would be approaching the station, what we would call the distance signal, and a detonator would explode, he would know that he would be a half a mile or a mile from the next signal, and he'd judge it accordingly. So drivers didn't like fog or snow conditions, but there were regulations left down for working under these conditions, and trains had to reduce speed naturally enough.
So you would want to be about your business. Tig, CIE and sport. You had a very good football side.
Indeed, we had, Joe, at the time. And to this day, I must admire the men that played with the CIE teams at the time, because normally they'd be working a good 8 hours and maybe 12 hours. They'd be back from Westport, Dublin, Galway, or any other area around, and they'd field a team. And those men would be dead tired, and yet they're all brilliant, all fit men. They were all brilliant lads. I could name a few of them.
Tell us some of them. Go, yes,
Brendan Sullivan was a great little player, a great outside right, and sometimes he played inside left.
Yeah.
Shawnee Nally, another brilliant left footer. John Kleins, another good full back. Mickey Russell, another hard worker. Tony Riley, Lord have mercy, those lads now.
Keep on, lads, yeah.
And Matty Woods was they used to call him the brown-eyed wonder at the time. He was a good footballer. Mickey Gaffey and his brother Joe was a brilliant. Frank Brennan, another good footballer. They were all really all, and they all worked hard. It could be hours and hours away and come back and field. Yeah, they were brilliant, very good. Apart from myself, of course.
Yes, I was just about to say that. I was going to tell you, apart from yourself, Ty was also minded the net as well as the engine. He was a good goalkeeper this time, believe me. Michael O'Connell, old workmates, who do you remember?
Oh, gosh, there's so many of them. You know, I remember, I was just saying, I met Frank Norton, the old bushman, the other day. He used to be a bit of a character down there, Frank. And I was saying to you, Johnny, met Paddy Reeves in Mullingar last year. He did a bit of cleaning in Athlone. You remember Tom Moore, Tom Greeley?
Yes,
Tom Derwin. And then do you remember when we used to have to work with the fitters and the boilermakers? Billy Milner, remember? Hughie Brenner, Jack Roach, John Burns, all that mob. You could go on forever.
So, you know, we could talk all day about it. And, you know, there was people out there who we tried to get, as you know, low lads, it's not right, we tried to contact fellas and they couldn't make it. There's so many fellas who could add different views to it. And we could go on about it. But anyway, as we do wind it up, Jimmy, what was your glorious memories, or would you do it over again?
No, if I had my choice, I'd never do it all over again, because it was an arduous life on the railway. Night work, you're going to bed at 6 o'clock in the evening when everyone else is getting finished going off somewhere.
Yeah.
And you'd be in bed all day, maybe on a Sunday evening. Sunday evening you go to bed to go early on Monday morning. So it wasn't a job at all for anyone.
Unsociable like Michael O'Connell?
Yeah, it was an unsociable life to the extent that you had to build your social life around the hours that you were available, and it didn't always work out. I remember, like, you know, going in at midnight on a Sunday night and you were at the Crescent and things were getting good around 1 o'clock in the morning, and you had your eye on a lassie that you were going to maybe square up for the night, and you had to go to bloody work, and it didn't work out too well. But it was a way of life, Joe, and you took it with you, and you had to be a bit mad, I think, to get up these hours, the nights and mornings, and sleep all day and work during the early hours. But it was good, it was good.
Tig Hurley, engine driver, you know, was considered a great job in the 40s and 50s.
Well, it was, considering when I was applied first for the job, I remember going for an interview, and the offices couldn't hold us. We were all on the platform in Houston Station, and there was 67 men lined up, all being interviewed on the platform. So it'll just tell you the interest that the young lads had at the time. I suppose they were all hearing that, been working on the railway, someday you're going to be a driver, was a great job. But I suppose overall, when you got to that stage, like what Jimmy Healy says, it was a very unsociable job. And you were going to bed when everyone else was getting up and going to dances. You couldn't do it, you're going to work.
That's right.
So that's the way the life of the railway, I suppose.
Hold it there for a minute. Then you had to go for an eyesight test every 2 years and a medical test every 4 years. And if you didn't make it, no matter how good you were out the gate, and that was that.
That was the hazards of the job. Eamon, any glorious or sad memories of the railway?
Well, Joe, I don't mean what you mean by glorious or sad memories. I don't know, my father retired in 55 after 48 years, and he was asked if he'd do the same thing all over again. He said he would. I retired after 48 years, and looking back, yes, I enjoyed the railway life. And you talk about the glory, well, there was great